You remember that garage, don't you? The one that smelled like motor oil and WD-40 and something deeper, something that reminded you that everything in that space had been touched 1,000 times by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Every nail sorted, every jar labeled, every tool hanging in its exact spot on the wall. You walked in as a child and felt something without having the words for it yet. You felt order, real order, built by someone who had learned the hard way that nothing could be wasted because nothing had ever been given freely. Those garages weren't just storage spaces, they were architecture, they were philosophy, they were proof that genius doesn't require money. It only requires wisdom. And today, we're going to remember exactly where that wisdom came from and exactly what it looked like in practice. Between the 1940s and the 1980s, millions of black families were making their way through an America that had been deliberately designed to keep them out, locked out of certain neighborhoods by redlining, locked out of the GI Bill's full benefits by discriminatory administrators, locked out of the kind of generational wealth that comes from being treated fairly in the marketplace. Black median family income in 1950 sat at $1,869 a year, barely half of what white families earned. Every dollar had to stretch, every object had to earn its place. And in the garage, which became one of the most sacred spaces in black working class and middle class life, that pressure produced something remarkable, an organizational genius so precise, so inventive, and so deeply practical that modern professional organizers are only now catching up to it. Today, we're exploring 25 genius ways Black grandparents organized a packed garage with zero wasted space, methods forged in hardship, refined across generations, and quietly passed down to every child who ever stood in that doorway, watching and learning without being told a single word. Let's start with something you've probably already seen sitting in your own memory, right at the edge of recognition. The Maxwell House can, the Folgers can, the Hills Brothers can with the robed figure on the label. You remember them lined up on a shelf like soldiers standing at attention, dozens of them, washed out and dried and filled with hardware sorted by size and type with a precision that would embarrass most hardware stores. A 2 pound Maxwell House can, roughly 6.5 inches tall and 5 inches across, held a full pound of 16-penny common nails without a single one rattling loose. Another held 8-penny finishing nails. A third held roofing nails. A fourth held drywall screws. The lids went back on tight, and every can was labeled, sometimes with masking tape and a Sharpie, sometimes with a Dymo label in raised white letters pressed into black vinyl tape, that satisfying clicking and grinding of the dial being turned and the lever being squeezed. At the peak of American coffee consumption in 1946, the average household burned through nearly 20 pounds of coffee a year. That meant nearly 20 cans, and not a single one was ever thrown away. Right next to those cans, tucked beneath the shelf above the workbench, was a trick so elegant that it still appears in woodworking magazines and garage organization guides today. And it was being done in black grandparents' workshops decades before the internet existed to carry the idea anywhere. Take a baby food jar, a little Gerber glass jar that cost maybe 15 cents in 1970. Remove the metal lid. Drive two short wood screws up through the lid into the underside of a wooden shelf. Two screws so it can't spin. Fill the jar with tiny screws, picture hooks, cotter pins, wire staples. Screw the jar up into its mounted lid. Suddenly, you have a row of transparent glass containers hanging beneath the shelf, consuming zero shelf space, contents completely visible through the glass. A grandparent raising children on a budget that left no margin for error didn't see a baby food jar as trash. They saw a storage unit that had already been paid for. And if the coffee can wall was the organizing system and the jar wall was the hardware library, the pegboard was the temple. A 4 by 8 sheet of quarter-inch tempered masonite pegboard, masonite being the actual brand name, patented by William Mason in 1924 out of Laurel, Mississippi, cost between $3 and $5 in the 1960s. It transformed a bare stud wall into a tool library where everything was visible, everything was reachable, and every tool could be located in under 5 seconds. Installation was precise, furring strips screwed to wall studs first, creating a half-inch air gap behind the board so the hooks had room to seat. Hook assortment packs ran under $2, but the real genius came in what certain grandparents did next. They painted the board white, that arranged every tool in its designated position, the hammer, the two claw hammers of different weights, the ball peen, the mallet, and traced each one with a permanent marker before painting the background black around those outlines. What remained was a white silhouette for every tool. When the hammer was missing at the end of a Saturday, that blank white shape told you immediately, without searching, without asking. Industrial manufacturers would later adopt this exact concept under the Japanese 5S lean manufacturing system and deploy it in factories worldwide. Black grandfathers were doing it in their garages in the 1950s. Meanwhile, down at floor level, the long-handled tools, brooms, mops, rakes, garden hose, had their own system. Old leather belts, the ones that had worn through their stitching or shrunk past usefulness, were cut into strips about 4 inches long, bent into U-shapes and nailed flat against the wall studs with 2 nails through each end, forming loops that held handles off the floor with the natural friction that leather creates against wood. Zero cost. Zero waste. The same hands that might have been turned away from the hardware store across town engineered a tool management system that kept the garage floor clear enough to actually work in. And clear floor meant room to move. Room to move meant room to think. Room to think was the one resource that was always available, no matter what else had been withheld. Up above in any garage with exposed ceiling joists, and most working-class garages had them. Unfinished overhead with 2x8 or 2x10 members running 16 inches on center. There existed a natural storage system that cost nothing at all to build. Leftover lumber slid up and across those joists horizontally, 12-foot 2x4s, lengths of 1-inch conduit, copper pipe from the last plumbing job, wooden dowels saved from a broken closet rod, long sections of molding from a room that got repainted. Nothing stood on the floor. Nothing leaned dangerously against a wall. Everything that was long and slender lived up in the rafters, organized by material and by how often it was needed. The most used pieces near the garage door end, the odd lengths pushed toward the back. A standard 2-car garage ceiling could store hundreds of linear feet of material with zero additional cost. It was the original overhead storage, and it required nothing but the building that was already there. And for the smaller things that needed not just storage, but visibility, ball and Kerr mason jars lined the shelves above the bench. A dozen quart jars cost about 75 cents to $1.25 in the 1950s. They held bolts organized by diameter and length, wire by gauge, sandpaper folded and sorted by grit, 60, 80, 100, 120, 150, 220. Each grit in its own labeled jar. You could see exactly what was inside without touching it, without opening it, without moving a single thing. Modern organization researchers call this visual management. Grandparents called it common sense because they had learned through hard experience that time spent searching was time stolen from the work itself. Above the hood of the car, between the ceiling joists and the roof deck, I sat dead space that contributed nothing until a sheet of 3/4-inch plywood came home and got laid across 3 or 4 joists, creating a platform that stored everything seasonal. Christmas decorations in carefully labeled boxes, luggage that came out twice a year, box fans packed away in October, winter coats folded and stored in May. One sheet of plywood cost under $3 in the 1970s. It effectively doubled the garage's storage capacity without adding a single square foot of floor space. Modern garage organization systems sell ceiling-mounted storage platforms for $200 to $400. Grandparents built the equivalent for the cost of a sheet of lumber and a few lag bolts. Down at bench level, cedar-lined wooden cigar boxes, roughly 9 inches by 6 inches and 2 inches deep, or salvaged from the barber shop or the corner store, became the small parts organizers that money genuinely could not have purchased better. The cedar resisted moisture naturally. The tight lid kept fine sawdust out. Stacked flat, 6 of them occupied the space one plastic organizer would claim. Custom dividers cut from thin plywood scraps or stiff cardboard created separate compartments inside each one. Brass hinges here, wire nuts there, razor blades in the corner section, transformed into precision storage by nothing but 15 minutes of careful work and the willingness to see what something discarded could still become. And then there were the milk crates, high-density polyethylene, 13 inches square and 11 inches deep, engineered to dairy industry specifications for strength and stackability so precise that the industry loses an estimated $80 million a year to their theft, which is the single most reliable measure of how valuable they actually are. Turned on their sides with open faces outward and stacked 3 high against a wall, zip-tied at the corners, they became open cubby shelves at zero lumber cost. Slid under a workbench, they became pull-out drawers. Stacked beside the door, they became a carry-all for a job across town. And by a happy accident of dimensional engineering, they held vinyl record albums perfectly, which is why they drifted through every room in the house and not just the garage. When a carburetor came apart on that workbench, or a door lock assembly, or the 12 separate pieces of a bicycle brake mechanism, the egg carton appeared. A standard 12-well cardboard carton held 12 categories of disassembled parts, moving in sequence from smallest to largest, so that reassembly was simply running the process in reverse. No missing washers, no guessing whether the spacer went before or after the spring, no pieces lost to the concrete floor's cracks. Surgical instrument trays work on this exact same logic. The egg carton cost nothing. A fresh one arrived every single week. For the things even smaller than that, the drill bits of a specific diameter, the individual transistors and diodes for electronics repair, the valve cores and straight pins and upholstery tacks, film canisters. From the time Kodak popularized 35mm film through to the rise of digital photography in the early 2000s, these small cylindrical containers accumulated in every household that owned a camera. Kodak's aluminum versions through the 1970s were virtually indestructible. Fujifilm's translucent green plastic versions came later, and photo labs gave away empties by the bag, 40 of them lined up on a shelf in barely 12 inches of space, each labeled with a strip of masking tape and a fine point marker, each holding one precise category of micro hardware. Free, precise, perfect, 2 pulleys, a length of clothesline rope, 2 S-hooks, and a cleat. That was the complete material list for the bicycle hoist that lifted a full-size bike to the ceiling and gave back 6.5 square feet of floor space for the lawnmower and the tool chest. The mechanical advantage of 2 pulleys meant you were lifting half the actual weight, which meant a 12-year-old could haul a 20-pound bicycle to the ceiling alone and feel the pride of that accomplishment settle into their chest in a way that stayed with them. Modern garage retailers sell this exact system for $40 to $60. Grandparents built the equivalent for under $3. When the refrigerator was finally replaced, the wire shelves came out before the appliance reached the curb. White vinyl-coated wire racks, engineered to hold 40 or 50 pounds of food without flexing, went up on garage walls mounted with simple L brackets. They held spray cans, automotive fluids organized by type, small hand tools. The wire grid meant nothing could hide behind anything else, everything visible from every angle. What retailers now sell as grid wall shelving at $40 a panel, grandparents installed for the cost of 4 brackets and 8 screws. The magnetic strips came from blown speakers that had given their last at too high volume, or from hard drives that had finally surrendered, or from the discount bin for $3. Mounted to the garage wall, they held every metal hand tool that wasn't already on the pegboard, chisels by width, screwdrivers by type, Allen wrenches in ascending order, snap-on, pull-off, nothing lost. Research on professional mechanics has found that tool retrieval time accounts for up to 20% of total repair time. The magnetic strip reduced that to 2 seconds. Grandparents didn't have that research. They had something better. The experience of knowing exactly what wasted time costs when your margin is already thin. Someone two doors down was replacing their bedroom furniture. The dresser sat at the curb on a Tuesday. The grandparent who saw it first understood immediately that what was there was not trash, but infrastructure waiting to be relocated. The drawers came out. Wooden runners went on to the underside of the workbench frame, and those drawers slid back in beneath the bench surface like purpose-built shop drawers. Sandpaper by grit, drill bits by diameter, paint brushes by width. The whole operation cost nothing but a few hours and the willingness to see what something discarded could still become. That same instinct applied to solid core doors pulled during renovations, 80 inches long, 32 to 36 inches wide, an inch and three-quarters thick, surfaces that could withstand hammering, clamping, and the full transferred weight of an engine block. Across two sawhorses or on four legs cut to working height, a salvage, solid core door became a workbench that cost under $10. Pegboard behind it put every tool within arm's reach. Baby food jars above it put hardware at eye level. Coffee cans on the side shelf kept supplies labeled and sorted, not just a workbench, a command center assembled from cast-offs, more functional than the most things sold new. Along the back wall, galvanized chicken wire, 1-inch hexagonal poultry netting, stapled flat against the studs, became a hanging system for everything too light and unwieldy, for pegboard hooks. S-hooks through the mesh held pruning shears, hand trowels, coiled hoses, at any point along the wire, infinitely adjustable. A 10-foot roll cost under $2 in the 1970s. It organized 30 tools that would otherwise be leaning, tangling, and falling, and it looked like something deliberate, because disorder was not acceptable in that space, not even in the corner no visitor ever saw. The Dymo label maker, introduced in Berkeley, California in the late 1950s, made its satisfying click through the 1960s and 1970s and 1980s in workshops and garages across the country. Dial a letter, squeeze the handle, press white raised text into self-adhesive vinyl tape. Nails 16D, nails 8D, roofing, drywall. For those without a Dymo, masking tape and a Sharpie accomplished exactly the same thing. The principle was identical either way. Anyone who walked into that garage at any time, for any reason, would know immediately what was where. Clarity was a form of respect for your own time and for anyone who might someday need to find something in your absence. Military surplus ammunition cans, 30 caliber and 50 caliber olive drab steel boxes with rubber gasketed lids, came home from Army-Navy surplus stores for $2 or $3 and became the garage's most protected storage. The rubber gasket kept the interior dry through humid summers and damp winters. Heavy gauge steel meant 4 of them could stack under full load. Built-in handles meant they loaded into a work truck in 30 seconds. They held precision measuring instruments shielded from moisture, tap and die sets protected from rust, the best drill bits, sharp and organized in a foam insert cut to fit. What the military designed for ammunition, grandparents repurposed for tools, because it's a good container regardless of what it was originally meant to hold. And in every packed garage, the corners were always the last claimed and the first wasted, left to shadows and that one broken snow shovel nobody had gotten around to removing. A triangular shelf unit built from a single sheet of 3/4-inch plywood fixed that permanently. A right triangle footprint, 2 sides flush against the walls, a diagonal front edge, 3 shelves at even intervals, motor oil and automotive fluids on the lowest shelf behind a 2-inch lip, garden chemicals in the middle, organized by season, coffee cans of sorted hardware on top. A corner that had been dead for years became the densest storage zone in the entire garage, built from one sheet of plywood, cut in an afternoon, assembled before dinner. Here is what is very easy to miss about all 25 of these methods if you move through them too quickly to really see them. Not one required a trip to a specialty store. Not one required a catalog order or a line of credit or the approval of a system that had spent generations finding reasons to say no. Every coffee can came from the kitchen. Every baby food jar came from the nursery. Every pegboard sheet came from Sears. ordered by mail in an era when that catalog was one of the only commercial spaces in America that did not ask what color you were before it decided what to sell you. An era when white store owners in the South publicly burned those catalogs in bonfires to discourage black customers from bypassing them. Every belt came from the closet. Every milk crate came from behind the grocery store. Every ammo can cost $3 at the surplus store. What those garages represented was something far more profound than smart organization. They were the physical expression of a worldview forged across centuries, tested under conditions designed to break it, and emerged on the other side not diminished, but precise and exacting and alive. When a grandfather sorted his nails into labeled Maxwell house cans on a shelf he'd built himself from a salvage door, he was making a declaration. I know exactly what I have. I know exactly where it is. Nothing here is wasted. Nothing is lost. And nothing here was handed to me by anyone who meant me well. Those garages are disappearing now. The people who built them are leaving. The children who stood in the doorways watching are now grandparents themselves, the last generation that carries the living memory of what those spaces felt like, smelled like, sounded like. The creak of a specific shelf, the metallic rattle of nails against a coffee can, the click of a dymo dial moving liter by liter through a word that would be pressed in white into black tape and stuck on a can that would outlast the decade. That knowledge is not written down anywhere official. It lives in people. In the people who remember standing in a garage doorway, watching hands that knew exactly what they were doing, learning everything without being told a single word. That knowledge, every bit of it, deserves to be passed on exactly as carefully and exactly as precisely as every labeled can on every carefully built shelf. Thank you so much for being here today, for taking this walk back through something that shaped so many of us in ways we are still discovering. If this brought back a memory, if it reminded you of someone you loved and a space you were privileged to stand in as a child, please hit that like button. Share this with someone who remembers. There are people in your life right now who need to see this. And if you want to keep taking these journeys together, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We'll see you there.